The house was quiet, just as it had been for the past few weeks. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the background as I sat on the couch, flipping through channels on the TV. My wife, Olivia, was in the kitchen, humming a tune as she prepared dinner. Her voice was light, carefree, and her movements graceful, but something was different. It wasn't obvious at first, but I could feel it. Something had shifted between us. The sparkle in her eyes wasn't the same, and the smiles we once shared felt more like obligations than expressions of joy. I couldn't pinpoint it, but it lingered in the air, something unsaid, a tension that neither of us addressed. Our marriage had always seemed perfect. We had met in college, quickly became inseparable, and married just a few years later. We had a routine, a rhythm that made sense. We shared everything, or so I thought. But over time, Olivia had started to pull away. It wasn't drastic at first, little things. She was spending more time on her phone, always texting or scrolling through it, but never letting me see what was on the screen. Her excuses were harmless. Work, friends, family, but my gut told me otherwise. It wasn't that I didn't trust her. I had always believed in the foundation we built. But the late nights out, the sudden changes in her behavior, began to build up in me like a quiet storm, one I didn't want to acknowledge. Still, I kept convincing myself I was overthinking. After all, she had always been so loving. She had always been the one who initiated the plans, the one who made sure I knew I was important to her. But now, there was this coldness, this subtle shift in the way she looked at me. I tried to ignore it. I'd come home after a long day at work and find Olivia in the kitchen, or reading a book, or lost in thought. She'd still greet me with a hug, but it didn't feel the same. The passion we once shared seemed like a distant memory. We had tried to talk about it once or twice, but those conversations always ended with her brushing it off, telling me I was imagining things, that work had been stressful, that she was just tired. I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew there was more. Tonight, she had planned to go out with friends. She had mentioned it casually, but the way she said it felt rehearsed. Just a girls' night, she had said, though I couldn't remember the last time she'd had one. I didn't ask any questions, didn't want to seem insecure, but there it was again, the nagging feeling that something was off. She looked up at me from the kitchen, her eyes lingering for a moment. "I'm just going to get ready," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I nodded, forcing a smile of my own. As she walked upstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was going to be different. I told myself it was nothing, just me being paranoid, but I couldn't help it. The silence between us had become deafening. I leaned back on the couch, staring at the TV, without really watching it. The thought of Olivia out there, spending time with other people, maybe even someone who made her feel more alive than I did, twisted something deep inside me. She hadn't been gone long, but I already felt the distance between us widen, like a crack in the foundation of our once solid relationship. I wondered if she noticed it too, or if I was just the only one feeling the weight of it. I glanced at the clock, then back at the door. It wasn't like her to be out this late without any explanation. She had promised she'd be back by midnight, but somehow, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't coming back alone. The doubt lingered like a shadow, refusing to leave. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her. But every time she left, every time she looked at me with that distant expression, I couldn't help but wonder what she was really doing when she wasn't with me. As the minutes ticked by, the knot in my stomach grew tighter. Maybe I was being irrational, but I couldn't help it. Tonight, something felt wrong. And deep down, I knew that when she came home, things would never be the same. I tried to calm myself, focusing on the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of the rain against the window. But the feeling persisted, an unsettling unease that I couldn't shake. Olivia left the house with a casual kiss on my cheek, a simple goodbye that felt more like a routine than an expression of affection. Her bag slung over her shoulder, and the car's engine hummed to life as she pulled out of the driveway, disappearing into the night. I sat in the quiet, the house feeling emptier with each passing minute. I couldn't help but think about her words earlier, the way she had spoken so easily about her girls' night. Something about it didn't sit right, but I pushed the feeling aside. After all, I trusted her, didn't I? Yet, the longer I sat there, the more that nagging voice in my head grew louder. It wasn't that I doubted her outright. I loved her. I wanted to believe everything she told me. But as I sat in the silence, my mind wandered to the small changes in her behavior over the past few months. Her texts were shorter, her phone was always face down, and she had started taking longer and longer to respond to my calls.
Was I imagining it?
Was I the one who was changing, becoming paranoid for no reason? The fact that she seemed so confident, so carefree as she left tonight, only deepened the unease in my gut. I tried to shake off the thoughts, but they were relentless. I found myself pacing around the living room, glancing at the clock every few minutes. The night was supposed to be a quiet one, but instead, I felt a storm brewing inside me. Why had she needed a night out so badly? Why had she started acting so distant? I knew she wasn't the type to leave without reason, but there was something in her eyes tonight, something that made me question everything I thought I knew. I sat back down on the couch, feeling a strange mix of frustration and fear. My thoughts drifted to her past. She was always outgoing, friendly, the life of any room. She had plenty of friends, but most of them were always in the same circles: work, family, a few old college friends. There was never any mention of a new friend, and I couldn't remember the last time she had introduced me to anyone she was particularly close with. She'd been more secretive about her plans lately, almost protective of her space, and it only fueled the doubts I was trying to ignore. The clock ticked on, but the hours seemed to drag by. I picked up my phone, but the screen showed nothing but a few meaningless messages. I set it down again, frustrated with myself. What was I hoping for? A text from Olivia telling me how much she loved me? That she was just out with the girls, having fun, and everything was fine? Or was I secretly hoping for a sign, any sign, that I wasn't just overreacting? That something truly wasn't right? As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was waiting for something. Something I wasn't ready to face. My mind went back to that quiet moment earlier, when she'd left. The sound of the front door opening pulled me from my thoughts. Olivia had returned, but her usual cheerful greeting was absent. I sat up straight on the couch, my heart pounding in my chest. The atmosphere felt different now, charged, as if everything had shifted in the few hours she'd been gone. She closed the door quietly behind her, and I could hear the sound of her shoes clicking softly on the floor as she made her way inside. It was too quiet. No laughter. No casual conversation. Just silence. She appeared in the doorway, her eyes immediately finding mine. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, guilt, maybe? It was fleeting, but it was there. She froze for a moment, unsure, as if she hadn't expected me to be awake, or perhaps wasn't sure how to face me after the night she'd had. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, my mind racing, piecing together everything I had suspected. The calmness I had tried to maintain was slipping, replaced by the surge of anger, frustration, and confusion that had been building in me all night. "Hey," she said quietly, her voice too soft, too guarded. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She looked tired, though there was an underlying unease that I couldn't ignore. Her hands were fidgeting, twisting her phone in her fingers like it was a lifeline. I couldn't help but notice how her movements were different, less fluid than usual, almost as if she were trying to distance herself from me without saying a word. "How was your night?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. But inside, my stomach was churning, a storm of emotions raging just beneath the surface. I had to keep control. I had to let her speak first. I couldn't let my own feelings cloud what I needed to hear from her. "It was fun," she replied, her voice trailing off. She didn't elaborate, didn't offer more detail, and I noticed her eyes flicking to the side, as if she was searching for a way out of this conversation. Her gaze quickly returned to me, but she was visibly uncomfortable now. "I didn't realize how late it had gotten," she added, forcing a light chuckle, but it sounded hollow. I couldn't take it anymore. The silence was suffocating. I couldn't ignore what I knew in my gut. I stood up, my voice low but firm. "Where were you, Olivia?"
Who were you with?
Her expression shifted, the corners of her mouth tightening into a nervous smile that didn't fool me. I told you, just out with friends. But the way she said it, the lack of conviction in her voice, made it clear that it was anything but the truth. I could see it now. The tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm she was trying so hard to project. "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I know something's been off for weeks, and I know you're not telling me everything. I need to know the truth, Olivia. What's really going on?" For a moment, she didn't speak. Her eyes flickered toward the floor, and I could see her struggling with something. Whether it was guilt, shame, or the fear of being caught, I couldn't tell. But I knew that whatever she had been hiding, whatever had been building between us, it was coming to light now. She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper when she finally spoke. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to get this far." Her words hit me like a slap, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I wanted to say something, to demand answers, but all I could do was stand there, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who is he?" I asked, the question slipping from my lips before I could stop it. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, the weight of the realization crushing down on me. Her eyes darted away from mine, unable to meet my gaze, and in that instant I knew. I knew everything. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words got caught in her throat. "It's not what you think," she began, but I wasn't listening anymore. The anger, the betrayal, had already taken hold of me, and I wasn't sure I could keep it contained. "Not what I think," I repeated, incredulous. "You've been seeing someone else behind my back, Olivia. You've been lying to me for God knows how long, and you expect me to believe it's not what I think." She flinched at the words, her face pale as she struggled to find the right thing to say. But there was nothing she could say. The truth was already hanging in the air between us, thick and suffocating. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, but her apology felt empty. It was too little, too late. The damage was done, and no amount of sorry could undo the betrayal. I stood there, frozen, the weight of her confession pressing down on me, suffocating me. Everything I thought I knew about her, about us, was suddenly shattered. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with my life, had turned into someone I didn't recognize. She wasn't the person I thought she was anymore, and in that moment, neither was I. Her voice, soft and shaky, reached me again. "I didn't want to hurt you, but it just happened. I don't know how to fix it." I looked at her, but the words wouldn't come. There was nothing left to say. The silence between us was suffocating. I stood there, staring at Olivia, and for a moment, I couldn't even process what she had just admitted. The woman I thought I knew, my wife, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I had trusted her, and she had shattered that trust in an instant. There were no more words to explain it, no way to fix what had been broken. My mind raced, but all I could feel was the raw, gnawing pain in my chest, a deep ache that felt like it would consume me whole. Olivia's eyes were full of regret, but it wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough to undo the betrayal. I could see her reaching for me, her hands trembling, but I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but somehow I couldn't bring myself to do it. She was already crumbling in front of me, and part of me hated her for it. But another part, one that I barely recognized, felt pity. Pity for what we had lost, for the person she had become, and for the future that was no longer possible. "I never meant for it to happen," she said, her voice barely a whisper. But the words fell flat. They meant nothing now. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she added, shaking her head as if she could somehow erase everything that had transpired. I couldn't listen to her anymore. Every word felt like a hollow excuse, a feeble attempt to justify what she had done. I had imagined so many scenarios, so many arguments, so many fights where I could confront her, ask her why. But none of those imagined confrontations had prepared me for this. Nothing had prepared me for the cold reality of seeing her, the woman I had loved, standing there and confessing that she had been unfaithful. I walked away from her, pacing the room, trying to steady my breathing. But it wasn't working. My chest tightened with every step I took. I wanted to hit something, to break something. I wanted to make her feel the way I felt, the way she had made me feel, betrayed, broken, useless. But I couldn't bring myself to lash out. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just numb. I turned back to her, and this time, there was no anger in my voice. Just quiet devastation. "How long?" I asked. My voice was flat, emotionless, as if the weight of the question alone was enough to crack both of us open. She flinched, her eyes dropping to the floor. "A few months," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I never wanted you to fight.